Welcome everybody to this regular meeting of Talking About Socialism from a Marxist point of view. We hold these meetings every fortnight on a Monday evening. My name is Nick Rack. I'm one of the organisers of Talking About Socialism. This evening we've got Ed Potts, who's another organiser of Talking About Socialism. He's also on the editorial board of Prometheus Journal. So welcome to Ed. He's going to be introducing the discussion this evening, which is looking at the recent presidential elections in the United States and drawing some lessons. So it'd be interesting to hear Ed's take and all of yours. Welcome particularly those who are at their first meeting of Talking About Socialism. Just some ground rules. The meeting is being recorded and it will go up on YouTube. So be careful what you say, because I don't want to have to edit the video. And after Ed is introduced, we normally give people 3 minutes, a bit of leeway, but we'll come around for a second time if people want another go. Is to try to make sure everybody gets an opportunity to speak. If you're watching this on YouTube, please click the subscribe button so that you can get notified of other videos that we post and keep in touch. So what I'm going to do now is ask Ed to introduce for about 15 or so minutes, and then we'll open it up for the discussion. So Ed, off you go.
Well, thanks, Nick. So there's a lot, obviously, that could be said about the election campaign and the result, and far too much to cover within 15 minutes, but I'll try and just draw out a few points which I think are relevant. I think the starting point for us as socialists is that despite the fact that there were clear and obvious differences between the two main candidates, Harris and Trump, differences between them personally, between their platforms, between the two parties, and the demographics of people who voted for them. All the same, this was ultimately a campaign rather, in which both candidates were staunch supporters of the capitalist system. And more than that, both candidates were candidates of big business. To just take one signifier of that, in terms of fundraising, big money in American politics, the Trump campaign, although we're still waiting on final numbers to be reported and published, the Trump campaign raised $388 million. While Biden was still in the race and still a Democratic candidate, his fundraising was more or less keeping par with Trump's, a bit over. But once Harris took over, as we all remember, the fundraising efforts of the Democratic Party shot up significantly, and she has now raised over $997 million. So a 2-to-1 or a 3-to-1 outspending of the Trump campaign. And of course, it's obvious for all to see that that kind of money doesn't come from the pennies from the workers. It comes from big business and it comes from the capitalist class. I think one overarching point is that the scale of Trump's victory is remarkable, because he won the popular vote. So in terms of just the general numbers of people voting for one candidate or the other, won the popular vote, which is not something that presidents always achieve when they successfully win election by any means, and especially not Republican presidents. He had failed, in fact, to do that in 2016 when Hillary Clinton won the popular vote but lost the election. He also won all 7 of the swing states, which were said to going to be determine the race between him and Harris. And so it's clearly a significant victory, not the very close race that we were told to expect. So I want to just look briefly at the two campaigns and where they've come from and where, in the case of Trump, they're going. In terms of Harris, broadly what we might describe as a progressive platform, various policies which would do a little at least to assist ordinary people in terms of prices, the cost of living, tax credits, welfare expenditure, broadly beneficial to working class people, although, of course, nothing like the sort of change that would actually make a difference in real terms to people's lives, and certainly not the kind of transformation of society that we as socialists want to see. Also, significant differences with the Trump campaign and the Republican Party on various social issues. Importantly, the right to abortion. Harris was advocating national protections for the right to abortion when many states are obviously at the moment in the process of trying to undercut that significantly. And this resulted in many respects in a significant demographic split between the groups which voted one way or the other. Young people, minorities of various descriptions, unmarried women, all skewed in general towards Harris. It should be said, however, married women appear to have voted for Trump, although albeit somewhat marginally, as did men across almost all age groups, again, marginally in many cases. But there's a clear skewing there in respect of various demographic trends. In terms of where Harris had come from as a candidate, she was initially a presidential candidate in the 2020 primaries, in which it was necessary for her to try and talk left and try and talk up her progressive credentials against the backdrop of the rise of the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party. So effectively, she had to try and take votes from that perceived voter base. And this was fairly farcical and thin on her part. Nobody really gave it much credence. Initially, she said that she was a supporter of Medicare for All, which is essentially the American left's catch-all term for policies towards universal healthcare. Then she backtracked. She said she wanted a fudge in which there was still a role for the private insurance industry. And of course, by the time of her presidential campaign in this year, she'd jumped her support for that kind of policy completely. Of course, a key issue facing American working class people, access to healthcare or lack of it. And we see very clearly where she stood on that in reality once she came close to the levers of power. Set against those vaguely progressive policies and credentials, there's a whole raft of reactionary policies as well, support for militarism in particular. And she also had a legacy of her involvement as Biden's vice president. He, of course, had tried to hold himself out as a pro-working class and pro-Labour president, but in many respects had showed himself to be the exact opposite of that, most notably in 2022, when he had used Congress to effectively legislate and ban a strike by rail workers by imposing a pay deal on them and averting a strike in that way. There has been a lot said, especially on the left, about Harris's support for Israel's genocide in Gaza, and especially among people on the left holding this up as a reason why socialists should not have felt to vote for her in any way. It has also been put forward as a demographic explanation for some aspects of the election results. For example, Trump winning in the state of Michigan, which has a large Arab American and Muslim American population. And the argument goes effectively that Arab Americans saw Harris supporting the genocide in short and stayed at home rather than vote for her. This argument's been put forward by Democratic Socialists of America, one of the largest socialist groups in America, and they have said in their most recent statement following the election, in her campaign, Kamala Harris has defended her administration's role in the genocide in Gaza and cozied up with Republicans, abandoning the Arab and Muslim community and the progressive base who helped put Democrats in power. This is the result, and the international working class is paying the price. It is perhaps worth mentioning at this point the role of the uncommitted movement. Now, this was essentially a movement internal to the Democratic Party in the broad sense, by which people who were against the genocide in Gaza mobilized to elect uncommitted delegates, so delegates which were not committed to a particular candidate in the Democratic primaries, and thereby seek to hold Biden and Harris to account and put pressure on them to change their policy on Israel-Palestine. It did, in fact, secure some limited successes, and it's worth noting for that respect, it achieved 37 delegates, and its best results were in Minnesota and Michigan, again, two states with significant Muslim populations. But on its political merits, what I'm going to suggest is no matter how much we may agree and sympathise and agree that Harris's policy on Gaza was atrocious and disgusting, it doesn't actually take us very far, that kind of campaign. For one reason, because even a reactionary president thoroughly in the grip of the war machine might, for their own reasons, arrive at a policy of peace rather than war on a particular issue. And we can see Trump on Ukraine as a clear example of that. But more importantly for us as socialists, it's clearly not a campaign that was capable of achieving its objectives because at most it amounted really to a protest and registering a protest against the policies rather than really trying to build any kind of coherent alternative, whether within or outside the Democratic Party. Any such alternative would need a much more comprehensive platform than simply being against the policy on that particular issue. In terms of the left and where the left was in all of this, perhaps what's most notable is the complete collapse, effectively, of the post-2016 left in the Democratic Party into support of varying degrees of enthusiasm for Biden and Bidenism in the form of Harris, the successor candidate. It's been on a long journey, that movement, because it started as an insurgent campaign in 2016, advocating a raft of extensive pro-working class policies and came up really hard against the Democratic Party establishment in the form of support for the Clinton campaign. But over the intervening years, Sanders and the leading figures and progressives in Congress have really been on a journey, to say the least. And this we saw signs of this in 2022 when Sanders said that he would not stand against Biden in the primaries if Biden were to run again as a candidate, effectively signifying his support for the administration's policies tacitly. And then in this year, as late as July, Sanders and AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the congressman from New York, were insisting that Biden was the best candidate and that anybody saying otherwise should effectively give their heads a wobble. Just 10 days before Biden stood down, Bernie Sanders had an op-ed in the New York Times, no less, in which he described Biden as the most effective president in the modern history of our country. Well, to say that that looked foolish in retrospect, some 10 days later when Biden stood down acknowledging effectively that he couldn't be an effective president, was perhaps an understatement. But of course, it reflects a political collapse as well. The leadership of the insurgent movement through the Democratic Party, which energized so many people and even dared to use the word socialist, ended up in rather meek support for the policies of Biden, in fact, if not in word, all the time. Looking ahead then to what we might expect from a Trump presidency, I probably can't go into too much in this, but I think we can learn something from the fact that the stock markets jumped significantly when the election results came in. The Standard & Poor 500 index jumped 2.5% the day after, which is the biggest post-election jump in recorded history. There was a surge in US stocks in general. And effectively, this is because investors, on behalf of the capitalist class, anticipate that the next Trump presidency is going to see lower taxes and less regulation. Of course, that's going to be a key battleground between the administration and the American working class movement, such as it is. We can also probably expect a year or so of Elon Musk, who's become a key advisor and aide to Trump, attempting to do more or less the same thing with the public sector as he did after acquiring Twitter. In other words, a series of heavy-handed layoffs, measures designed to antagonize people into quitting, and overall, as he would have it, trimming the fat. Trump's rather chaotic record during his first term, if that's anything to go by, thanks, Nick, and in particular his mercurial relationship with his advisors means that it may be that Elon Musk's tenure doesn't last all that long, but nonetheless he could do a lot of damage in the year or 18 months that he might have. This is all going to contribute to significant challenges and significant fights. And there's going to be clearly serious battles in the next period throughout Trump's presidency, as there would have been, no doubt, during the years of Harris' presidency as well. So where does that leave us next time? Because, of course, as things currently stand, presidents are limited to 2 terms, even if non-consecutive. And so this will be Trump's last term as president. It raises a real question of where the energy of the movement surrounding him, because it has been a significant movement, is going to go. It also raises the question of what socialists are doing in response. I don't really have time to go into the detail of what socialists are doing through the various organizations and the various arguments within DSA towards the Democratic Party. But what is clear as a general proposition, I think, is that if the working class movement and the socialist movement in America repeatedly refuses to build an independent alternative to the two-party system, then inevitably the next election, the one after that, and the one after that, there will always be this choice between 2 candidates supported by big business, committed to policies which serve the ruling class rather than the working class, and which offer working class people no real alternative, which is going to change their lives. And the question, therefore, for the American working class, just as it is facing the working class of this country, is by what means do we organize a vehicle to challenge the ruling class, to comprehensively argue against its policies, to pursue a policy of independent political representation for our class, which isn't based on horse trading and deals with the ruling class and representatives which flip-flop and vacillate between one and the other, but instead a party which serves our class and advances the change that we need to see in society. That really is the key task facing us. Otherwise, it will be more of the same next time. I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Ed. A lot of meat there for everybody to get their teeth into. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up for discussion. Please indicate by raising the yellow hand, which should be at the bottom of your screen. If you can't see it, wave into your camera and I'll try and pick you up. Somebody might point you out if I miss you. So just while you're collecting your thoughts there, points that Ed's touched on, the difference or not between the 2 parties, the 2 candidates, the backing of the billionaire oligarch class for both parties, although clearly differences. Why did Trump win and Harris lose? What does it mean for working class struggle? What do socialists do? Lots of stuff there. So Matthew, I'm going to call you in now. 3 minutes to start, and then we'll come back for a second round. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, comrades. No, thanks to Ed for that introduction. I think there's a few things really that you need to also take into account. I mean, first of all, Trump got roughly the same number of votes as he did in 2020. And what happened with Harris is she's got 10 million votes fewer. So effectively 10 million people refused to vote for her compared to Biden. Okay, so there's a number of factors in there. First of all, of course, obviously with the rise of inflation caused by the Ukraine war and a number of other factors, what it meant actually, of course, is a reduction in real wages. The bulk of the working class did not recover anything like the increase in prices, and particularly price of groceries, etc., etc. So people were looking at lower living standards over the period of the Biden administrations. Firstly, I think that the other, I mean, there's a number of other things, obviously, but the one that sticks out for me also is the effect of the repression of the protests against genocide. The fact there have been protests across the whole of the US, and which have been met with pretty savage repression. You've seen large numbers of people being sacked, which, I mean, obviously in the US, I mean, it's much easier to sack people than here, but large numbers of people have been sacked for protesting against genocide. People have been thrown out of universities. University organizations have been banned across states. We've had thousands and thousands of people being arrested. Some people will go to jail, there's no question. All of that was supported by both parties. There was a competition almost between the Dems and the Repugs as to who could be the most savagely repressive. Okay, the Republicans in the House probably made it slightly to put their noses slightly in front, but the Democrats were racing to keep up. So there was no, I mean, in those terms, no difference between the two. And that, of course, I mean, the effect of that politically is on a whole section of people who just say, well, why would we vote for that? People stayed at home. I think the other question, of course, is money. I mean, the thing about US elections, of course, is that following on what was called the Citizens United decision by the Supreme Court, and the thing is, of course, obviously with the corruption and capture of the Supreme Court by the far right, basically it has altered all the law. It has been able to alter laws, and effectively it's been writing laws. It doesn't matter what Congress says. Actually, the Supreme Court then says, well, we'll have something different. And Citizens United, essentially what it did was allow people to buy elections. It said, okay, you can set up these things, political action committees. You don't have to declare. You don't have to declare what you put into them. So you can have what's called dark money, i.e., money that's unattributable. And these spent billions upon billions upon billions. And actually, US elections are controlled by the oligarchy, through this mechanism. Billions are now spent on elections, even down to quite low level elections. Being millions and millions of dollars can suddenly arrive in a local election if a liking is taken to this. I think in terms of the abortion, the issue of abortion. Now, the thing is, you have to remember with abortions, the Democrats don't really give a shit about abortion. They had 50 years, during which time, from Roe v. Wade, during which time they could have enacted in legislation a right to abortion on numerous occasions in which they had control of the White House, the Senate, the Congress, and at no time did they do it or even try it. So really, it's been used as a mechanism in order to try and drum up support rather than any form of actual action, or the fact that they actually take it seriously as an issue. I'll leave it there because you're obviously signaling to me to stop.
Thank you, Matthew. I'm going to call in Walter, who I believe is joining us from the States.
Yes, I'm in New York. I think the main thing that has to be said about the campaign is that it's a disaster for working class and oppressed people. Trump was running on a program. He denied it, but the so-called Project 2025, which is essentially, as one of its propounders put forward, the idea is to reverse the 20th century, reverse all the gains that the labor movement, the women's movement, that the civil rights movement made in the 1930s and 1960s in this country. They're very explicit about it. And unlike Trump's first term, they're preparing, which was kind of a shambles since he wasn't prepared to win. Now he is prepared to win, and they're preparing to appoint to various positions hundreds, if not thousands, of Trump lawyers, Trump politicians into key positions in order to carry this all out. On top of that, he is encouraging fascist organizations to incur violence on anybody who objects. And there's a great danger that now faced by immigrants, especially undocumented immigrants, but not only, and other oppressed sectors. I think most particularly transgender youth who are who have been targeted by Trump's campaign and are in very much danger. But the initial danger will be for immigrants. There are all kinds of plans now to round up, and Trump claims to deport millions of people. Whether it's even physically or economically possible is a different question, but he's certainly going to cause a lot of pain in that sector. So that's the main thing. And I should add that's why a lot of us on the left thought it was necessary to tactically vote for Harris, despite her terrible politics and her pro-imperialist, pro-capitalist politics, just in order to defend the democratic rights that we still have in the United States. Harris's campaign turned out to be a disaster. It didn't start that way. You may remember that in her debate with Trump, she smashed him. And she was running for she got anointed in either late July, early August. In early August, she was running a kind of left-wing economic campaign, tax the rich, stop price gouging. And then in mid-September, she dropped it. The plutocrats got her ear and said, you can't run a capitalist campaign on those grounds, and she dropped it. And therefore, she made no appeal whatsoever to the working class, who previous speakers explained are suffering under, particularly inflation, loss of jobs, and so forth. So she really blew it, but in a sense, the Democratic Party had to blow it because that's their nature as a capitalist party. And although the campaign started off almost sounding populist, it ended up not that way. And the same is true, by the way, of Biden's 4-year presidency. The first 2 years, starting with the COVID pandemic, they put forward a number of relatively progressive economic programs and then dropped them. Even though COVID didn't disappear, they stopped sending the checks to people with children and all kinds of other tax benefits that kept many people above the poverty line. And that got dropped. So the Democrats, being a capitalist party, not a working class party, they appeal to the working class, but they dropped the ball. And that's almost a necessity that they would have dropped the ball, given who they are. So I think those are the main things to point out. That the real threatening and fascistic nature of Trump's campaign, and the fact that he won a popular majority is just going to be devastating. And it means, by the way, that most of the left is quite demoralized about that and doesn't seem to be about to do anything. DSA, Evan mentioned the DSA not supporting Harris. DSA didn't even support Biden last time around. It wasn't because of Gaza. It's because DSA is a pretty unorganized organization when it comes to national politics. They're very good at elections locally, but nationally, remember, the original slogan was Bernie or bust. No presidential candidate except Bernie, and they kept through that. So it wasn't Gaza that stopped them, even though that's the excuse they gave. It was their general lack of interest in national politics.
Thank you
That's
very
a
much.
very okay. I'll stop there. Lots more to be said, but okay.
Yeah, Walter, I gave you a bit more time as well, but we'll bring you back in a bit later after the discussion's gone round. But Soraya.
Yeah, just a few points. I think that the victory of Trump will be a boost for parties in Europe, like the Alternative for Germany, the National Rally in France. And what does it mean in terms of the economic effect he's promising for Europe, and how that will affect European politics? He's pushing for import taxes for European goods. Will there be an impact because of the deals that he could potentially make with China? Policy in everything's just disappeared. I'm not quite sure what's happened, but anyway, I'll keep talking. If you can't hear me, let me know. It seems like he's probably going to be wholly supportive of Netanyahu and the policies of the Israeli government in Gaza and the slaughter of the people of Gaza. It's I was reading the other day, and I'd be interested in what Walter and other comrades think about this, that it's likely that he'll be far more effective than he was in 2016 because he didn't have the political aids around him to implement the sort of things that he wanted to do, and he had to rely on establishment Republicans who tended to not that they were particularly against him, but tended to slow him down and block the more extremist policies he wanted to put through. And so what I understand he issued an executive order at the end of his first term, creating a new Schedule F, I think it's called, which strips all federal workers of their job protections and allows him basically to fire any bureaucrat that he wants. And so surround himself. There's been a compiling of lists of loyalists to Trump, and that's the basis for them being given jobs because they'll do basically whatever he wants. So it's I think an interesting point and a discussion all in and of itself. Walter saying that about people saying, well, have to vote for Harris, and my words, hold your nose. I think that given that, and I'm finishing now because I'm mindful of the time, but given how there is no difference between the Democrats and the Republicans, and that really, I don't think, and really, if you look back, that's another reason why Trump won. That I don't think if I had been there that I would have taken that approach. I think it's very difficult in the circumstances, but I don't think it's the same thing as what happened in the France presidential elections, and I think, difficult as it is, it's necessary to say, and even if there's a shortage of a socialist candidate, that's necessary to argue, well, there should be one, and these people are all just the same. Anyway, that's simplifying a very complicated matter, but just some thoughts.
Thanks very much, Soraya. I've got Janet's hand. I'm sorry, can I just say, I'm sorry if weird things were happening to the screens where you are. Something went wrong with my computer screen here, and I hope I fixed it. But anyway, apologies for that. Janet.
Yeah, a few questions. Just before that, just to say what I think I agree with Soraya about who I'd vote for. I was in California just a few days before the election. My family, who are progressive, very mixed, Jewish, Muslims, British, American, and so on. I didn't even ask who that. I mean, they were supporting Harris. They were going to Nevada. They were doing various things. But certainly, if I was an American and I was living there, I wouldn't have voted for Harris. I would have voted, I suppose, for Jill Stein. So I was a bit disappointed in them, really. But anyway, that's just a total aside, basically. Yeah, some questions. And I think, Soraya, you might have raised this, I don't know. How far do we think the move to the far right or the right is actually the same qualitatively as what's been happening in many other parts of, particularly in Europe? I'm just taking up, I think, something that Walter was talking about in terms of Project 25. I mean, I think I was skeptical some time ago that actually, even if Trump got in, he would deliver on it. But I'm much less skeptical now, given that he has won the Senate. The Republicans are, I don't know if it's confirmed about the House, and the kind of Republicans that are in there are the kind who would basically either want to deliver Project 25, or they will want to, they're Trump's people, or they'll want to be seen as Trump's people. But if it does go ahead, if there is, enormous deregulation, if they're going to take away the rather sparse safety net, then where does the resistance to that come from? I can't see it, but I mean, maybe somebody else can say. I mean, does it come from the unions? Well, probably not, at least maybe if it's around deregulation, I guess. And the third question really is about a new mass party. I mean, clearly, most of us would say there is a need for that here and in the States and other places. Is it actually more difficult to envisage it in the States than it is here? And are we talking about the same kind of strategy, the same kind of things that need to be done to build a mass movement, or are they different? Are they the same, or are they different? And does really what happened to the Democrats and what we think Trump is going to do, is that going to increase the opportunities for that mass movement, or is it going to stifle it even more? And I guess those are unanswerable questions. They're questions. So.
Thanks very much, Janet. Really interesting and important questions. Just see if there are any other hands. Anybody else that wants to come in? Will.
I think that, and I'd be interested to know what people think about this. I think there may be a world in which Trump will try to execute some form of mass deportation, even if only for a certain amount of political value and in order to further kind of split the Democrats. Because you kind of have to remember that the United States did actually carry out an internment plan for anybody who looked Japanese during the Second World War, and they built internment camps and put people in them. They do have an absolutely phenomenal and large prison industrial complex. It's not that they're without the expertise to carry out a project where you start rounding people up because they don't have documents, and then you start putting them in places in the middle of nowhere, and you build another kind of prison industrial complex that corporate America would buy into. And I think that's entirely feasible. And the guy that, this guy Miller, who was a spawn of Bannon, and if you look at his background, he is a serious racist. He means it. And I think there's a real likelihood that they could try and carry something out of that order in the United States. And the key thing is I think, if somebody's pointed out, is what's the resistance to that? And that may be a flashpoint, for resistance. It may not, I don't know, but I can conceive of it actually. Kind of didn't before, but like Janet, I can see stuff like that happening now. I think, as people have pointed out, the key thing was the credit crunch, and what the Democrats have had to offer, over the last 16 years to the American working class, which is not much. And if we think about how we feel about it here, what the result of the credit crunch and COVID and God knows what else has been here over the last 15 years, in this country, you've got something that approximates to quite a wholly and torn safety net. In the United States, you just haven't got that. And if you're in that situation and you elect Obama, and he does 2 terms, and then you elect Biden and he does a term, and you're poorer and you're worse off, then what I can see why a whole layer, I can see why 10 million people would disappear. I can see it. It makes complete sense to me. And I have to say, I would have found it, I voted Labour in my constituency because there was nobody else while the Gaza war was going on, right? So, ethical dilemma. But you can see why a large amount of Muslims and a large amount of Arabs would not vote. And young people would just simply wouldn't vote Harris, and understand it. The crying shame is that the left, and again, we are no exemplar, the left in the United States didn't have somewhere for them to go. You know, the Green Party's vote went up from 400,000 to 600,000, but that's not pinprick. You know, it's an ant on the arse of an elephant, really. And I think that has to give us pause for thought about where we're going next, because I can conceive of a political situation in this country where Labour's not the second party in the next election, it's the third party. And the reason why it's the third party is because lots of working class voters who are going to experience a real shock from this Labour government, you know, may switch to Reform because they won't vote Tory, but they might switch to something that looks like it's offering them. And Farage isn't stupid, you know, he voted against the cut to winter fuel payment. They compose left and on immigration to the right, and they might hollow out some of Labour's base. We might end up with the Labour Party in third place, basically. That is a useless instrument for the working class in any sense whatsoever. So for me, it kind of, environmental questions aside, and the mind boggles about what's going to happen there. But for me, it really ups the ante for the British left to begin to, socialists and Marxists on the British left, to begin to think about how we can collaborate in order to bring about a socialist electoral challenge for the 2025 elections. Because it's, you know, 4 years away now. And I think that's the most important question that we face now. And I think the results of the American elections kind of reinforce that for me.
Thanks very much, Will. I'm going to just come in myself a few minutes to make some points, because I think I disagree. Well, I disagree with Walter, and obviously Walter will be able to come back on this. I thought that Soraya's points were really important, and I see that Richard Harris has made a comment in the chat to this effect, that so long as Labour activists and socialists continue to vote for what they may argue is the lesser evil, we're going to get evil. The differences between the two parties are clear, as Ed has expressed. There are differences, and I wouldn't seek to minimize those differences. But they are differences between different strategies within the American ruling class as to how to exploit the working class and prosecute imperialism on an international scale. And in my opinion, socialists should not be backing one side or another, or even succumbing to the argument that we have to vote for Biden or Harris in order to keep out Trump, because basically we have the seesaw, and nothing fundamentally changes. I don't suggest for one moment that it's an easy thing. We have what, 350 million population in America, and DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, have got what, 80,000 members, and there are some small Marxist or socialist organizations that populate the areas outside of the Democratic Party. But there has to be a serious attempt to try to bring socialists, communists, Marxists, whatever term you want to make, together to start making the hard inches to begin with, never mind the hard yards or the hard miles. Because if you go back to Bernie Sanders, and I've got a lot of criticism of Bernie Sanders for the reason that Ed's outlined, but when he stood in 2016 for the Democratic nomination, I think he got something like 46% in that round of nominations to Hillary, and lost to Hillary Clinton. But he did mobilize grassroots support for what was a radical social democratic project. I mean, I think in this room we would go much, much further than that social democratic platform. But it shows that there is support for an alternative. We need to develop that alternative and explain how social democracy can't fundamentally solve the problems of capitalism. But there was a discussion. What's happened since, however, is that Sanders has retreated and he's ended up endorsing Biden and he's ended up endorsing Harris. And then in the aftermath of the election, he's come out and he's made some quite correct criticisms of Harris's campaign. He said that the Democratic Party lost the working class. It didn't address the working class. And he criticized the campaign for trying to appeal to moderate Republicans like Liz Cheney. I agree with those criticisms, but the question remains then, why on earth did Sanders stay in the Democratic Party? Why has the DSA stayed in the Democratic Party? And it's a similar, if not exact, replication of what has gone on in Britain with Jeremy Corbyn, Momentum, and then the drifting out or the desertion of hundreds of thousands of potential socialist or socialist activists into nowhere, no organized fight back. So somebody, and I'm looking at organized socialists, Marxists in the States, somebody has to take the initiative and do the hard organizing and political discussions to try to bring people together. I'm not suggesting that by the next election, they'll be in a position to beat either the Democrats or the Republicans. I mean, Ed's talked about finances and Matthew's made the point, but the figures that I've seen actually are more in tune with Matthew. The Financial Times said that Harris and Trump combined, their campaign spent $3.5 billion, and they raised between them $4.2 billion. A lot of the money that went to Trump, by the way, has been used to pay his legal fees, so not necessarily on his election campaigning. But just finish on these points. That Harris completely turned her back on the working class, and they thought they were going to ride home, and they came across, in my opinion, as entitled, superior, talking down. They took the working class for granted, and they looked at the headline statistics for the economy, the stock market and so on, and it's doing well, and completely ignored the reality. Childcare doubling between child poverty rather doubling between 2021 and 2023, and then increasing by a further 1 million children in poverty in 2023. People suffering from inflation for gas and groceries, and people were looking for an alternative. And Trump had the ability to tap in much more, criticizing the Democrats, and people looked for an alternative. And in the absence of a socialist alternative, where are people going to go? Some people, 10 or 11 million, as I point out in my article on the TAS website, stayed at home. They disappeared compared with Biden 4 years ago. But a lot of them will have gone to Trump. And it's really troubling that the far right, there's a debate about whether you would call Trump individually a fascist. There are certainly fascists backing him, and it's a danger. And the socialists and the labor activists have to get their act together, just like we have to get our act together here and in Europe and elsewhere, because the far right are on the march. And if we don't give an alternative, it will go to the right, because people don't trust the establishment, they don't trust the incumbents, they don't trust the people in power, and they can flock in large numbers to the right in the absence of anything else. I'm going to call Matthew in and then Walter, because I know Walter will want to come back on some of the points that have been raised. Matthew.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Yeah, I think there's a few points made. What's been said. I mean, the other issue you've got, apart from anything else, is of course US democracy is not particularly democratic. You know, you can't. I mean, if you're a party and you want to organise an election, you can't just go turn up and register to get a vote. You have to get. All of the states have different regulations in order to get on the ballot. And this time around, actually, what the Democrats did was to employ a fleet of heavy-duty lawyers. So even if people turned up with all the signatures and so on and so forth to get on the ballot, they got challenged. You know, they couldn't get. You know, they had real trouble getting on the ballot. Even the Green Party couldn't get on the ballot in some states. So I mean, it's not just sort of walk in there and fulfil the regulations and you'll get on, because obviously they don't want that. And so I mean, the other thing I think which is important, of course, is that I mean what we're seeing here, of course, is the decline of the imperial hegemon and a move away from democracy itself, which is going to have a huge effect on the rest of the world. I mean, if the US starts disposing of democracy in large part, then obviously it's going to have a massive effect on everybody else. I think you can see this actually quite clearly in terms of what they're going to do. I mean, the immigration issue, they've actually appointed this guy Homan, who is just basically going to run the US version of Gestapo. I mean, if you want to deport millions of people, you have to run a police state. It's actually you're going to have to go rounding up people in the basis of a police state and concentration camps and the rest of it. There's no two ways of doing it. And he's now saying this is what he's going to do. And then of course you've also got, as people have pointed out, Miller, who is a fascist, quite clearly fascist. It has now been appointed to effectively the head of policy. I mean, his line actually in the election was America only for Americans, which is an exact copy of Hitler. It's exactly the same as Hitler. But obviously the impact of that is going to be vast. I mean, apart from anything else, you've got 11 million people, who are undocumented in the US, and entire sections of the economy, like food processing, agriculture, construction, etc., are entirely dependent on those people. That's how the thing works. And you're actually going to stop huge chunks of the economy if you start dragging people out, and throwing them in camps. It's going to get really crazy. Other thing, of course, they're going to do is start enacting tariffs, which is just going to have a huge effect on the rest of the world economy as well, to grind all sorts of things to a halt. I mean, the thing is, you can't have in the current world economy, and given the nature of capitalism as it is now, you can't have autarky. It's not possible. The entire world economy is integrated across national boundaries. And what Trump seeks to do is try and reverse that by throwing in tariffs, which basically will just grind huge sections of the world economy, into reverse, which is going to cause a massive issue in the rest of the world. In terms of, as I say, Project 2025. I mean, people should look at it. I'll put it up on the chat. I mean, it is horrible. It is a file. And they're talking about things like Schedule F, essentially by declaring that thousands and thousands and tens or hundreds of thousands of federal employees can just be sacked and replaced by extreme right people volunteering on the grounds of their affiliation. What they intend to do clearly also is to remove regulation of health, safety, environmental regulation, the whole lot. Which of course is going to kill large numbers of people as well. So it's going to get really quite crazy. And the question is, what kind of resistance is there going to be, and what's the political impact in terms of what political lessons do people take from this and the resistance necessary? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Walter, I'm going to call you in now. I'll give you a bit longer to develop your points.
Thanks. I really have to disagree with Soraya and Richard and Nick about the lack of difference between the Republicans and Democrats. Until maybe 4 years ago or 8 years ago, I would have agreed with that. There was very little difference, and I would have not advocated voting for the Democrats, even though they might have been a lesser evil on this or that question. Starting with Trump, though, and especially you couldn't quite see it maybe the first time in 2016, but subsequently to that, you certainly could see it. There was a qualitative difference between the two parties. The Trumpists were out to really suppress democratic rights. The Democrats were not. The Democrats depend on the votes of Black people to get elected. They depend on the votes of labor unions and the work of the organizing of labor unions to get themselves elected. They would not suppress Black votes. They would not suppress unions. They would try to incorporate the unions, certainly, but not suppress them. Those are really key differences. And the Republican Party now has enlisted this fascist-leaning Trump in order to carry out this project of getting rid of all the gains that working class and oppressed people have made over the last century. So there really is a key difference. Let me name one specifically. Over the Gaza protests, I can perfectly well understand why Arabs and Muslims and many others were so disgusted with the genocide of Biden and then also Harris in Gaza and Lebanon now. Why they wouldn't vote for Harris. It's understandable, but it's like cutting off your nose to spite your face. Trump would be worse. Both internationally, he would give Netanyahu a free hand and not even make the pro forma objections that Biden made to the way Israel was treating Gaza. And Trump also promised to suppress protests. There were plenty of protests against the Gaza genocide under Biden. They were partly suppressed by local Democratic mayors even, but Trump said he would call out the military to put a stop to them, and no doubt he would try to do that. So there were serious differences between the two parties. One represents decaying imperialism, the other represents an incipient fascism, and therefore a tactical vote has to be necessary. I can't go into that more. I'll put on in the chat a link to a statement that my organization wrote about this, which makes this argument more thoroughly. I want to say one thing about the Green Party. The Green Party of Jill Stein is not the Green Party of Howie Hawkins 40 years ago. Howie Hawkins was a labor advocate, is a labor activist, and fought a working class campaign. Jill Stein is not. Jill Stein ran openly a pro-Trump campaign. She campaigned especially in Michigan, a swing state. It used to be that the Greens would avoid campaigning in swing states so that they didn't want to be blamed for causing the Democrats to lose. This time they went specifically for swing states and saying, we want to teach the Democrats a lesson. We want Harris to lose, which means obviously they want Trump to win. And it had an effect. It's like treason to the oppressed people, especially Arabs and Muslims. I can understand why they wouldn't vote for Harris, but nevertheless, Stein made it far worse by that kind of campaign. So, given the limited time, I'll stop there, but I'll put in the chat the statement that I mentioned, which goes into some of this in a bit more detail.
Thanks very much, Walter. Can I see who else wants to come in, either make some points or ask any questions or answer some of the points that have been made by other speakers in the discussion so far? So I'm just going to pose some questions for people to come back on in response to Walter's points. For my part, and I also think that Soraya and Richard and others who made similar points, I don't think any of us would disagree that there are significant differences between the Democrats and the Republicans. But I don't think that would lead us, certainly wouldn't lead me, to make me put a cross against Harris as opposed to Trump, because in doing so, and I think this is the problem with Bernie Sanders and unfortunately with Walter's position, the argument is that those socialists like Sanders, social democrats with a popular base, have simply led workers into voting for the Democrats and led them up a blind alley, frankly. And I don't see it as a tactical decision, because if there was a strategy that one could see, one might be able to say, okay, well, this is a tactic. We don't necessarily agree with it, but we can see that there's something else in mind, something else being planned behind this. But there's nothing. I don't see in America any serious attempt to try to build what you might say a party of labor. There have been historically attempts to do that, or a clearly socialist party, both of which would be advances, in my opinion. But so long as labor, the trade unions, the trade union bureaucracy, and workers are tied to the Democrats, we are going to simply deliver people to Trump, because the Democrats cannot satisfy the aspirations of American workers. And by my reckoning, it's 11 million votes compared to 4 years ago who disappeared. Why did they disappear? Why didn't they come out? Because they were not enthused. They drew the conclusion that they couldn't put a cross against Harris, notwithstanding those people clearly saw or would see what we've pointed to, and what Walter has ably pointed to about what Trump is. But also, and this is a really important point, Trump's base is working class. It's the poorest. It's the people on benefit who've seen their child family credit disappear in 2021, who are they've seen household poverty increase under Biden and then latterly Harris. And so inflation, the fear of unemployment, has led some workers to think that Trump is an alternative. Now, if we say, no, the way to solve these problems is Harris, we're delivering them, in my opinion, to the right. And therefore, however difficult it is, we have to find and discuss a strategy to build something as an alternative. So does anybody else want to come back in on any of those points? Disagree or agree or ask any questions?
Kate's got her hand up, Nick.
Sorry?
Kate has her hand up.
Okay, Kate, come in. I didn't, yeah, Kate.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't find the electronic thing.
Don't worry. I can't see everybody across the top of my screen, so thanks to Will for pointing you out.
Yeah, I just thank all the people who've made all these really important points, because I just felt like I didn't know enough to say anything really. But on the point about whether you voted for Kamala Harris or Trump, I mean, I felt the same dilemma was here about voting Labour. And I mean, I was never going to vote Labour because I saw what was going on. But I think the real sort of crucial point is, if somebody's supporting a genocide, you know, you can't support that person, you can't support that candidate, because it tells everything else really about them. I just feel that's so crucial. And that's how I felt about Starmer. I was going to vote for him anyway, because, you know, because like many other people, I've been involved in supporting Corbyn and seen what had happened with the witch hunt and the lack of respect for immigrant people and that kind of thing, you know, and using anti-Semitism as a smear for the left. A lot of people didn't know about that really, and felt like that Labour was the only alternative. And now they're beginning to realise. So, and I really think that the campaign for Palestine here has really opened a lot of people's eyes. And I think that here there was a shift in the elections, that some people who were independent were voted in because of their support for Gaza, but also because they were arguing for something different. And I felt there was a shift then. And I think with people like Kamala Harris or Starmer, they will be, similarly, I'm sure she would betray them, because often these people who have another agenda and it's hidden are just as bad. And now, Labour pretend to be more progressive. They scrapped that Rwanda project, and they just had a roundup of people without documents, maybe not to the same scale that Trump's arguing for or promoting, but they're doing it, and they're talking about offshoring, and they don't care about migrant lives at all. And they're very hypocritical, because just as someone was saying about the US, migrants, undocumented migrants, actually massively hold up our economy. Anyway, I won't say any more. I hope what I said was kind of like, you could understand it.
Of course, Kate, thanks very much. Never hesitate to make your points. Everybody's got points to make. Will?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a difference between I wanted Labour to win the election. Yeah. And I wanted Labour to win the election because I thought that it's only with Starmer in power that they will demonstrate what they're going to do. And that a defeat for the Labour Party at this election, I think, would have been a massive blow to the whole of the Labour movement, not all of which I politically agree with, actually. I think the difference is with the United States is that, I don't know, put me right, Walter, but it seemed to me that it's pretty clear that the Democrats have been crapping on the working class quite a lot over the last 20 years. And the argument certainly couldn't be put that we don't know what the Democrats are going to do next. And as you described it yourself, it was kind of one party representing a decaying imperialism. And with the best will in the world, I would find that very difficult to vote for, to be honest, in that context. And this is not about finger pointing or anything, because I just don't think we're there. But it looks like the American left just failed to build any kind of alternative in the period. I think for the reasons that Nick was pointing out, that if you ask people to vote Democrat all the time, then building an alternative left party or socialist party, I think is a better phrase, is not going to come about. But the point about the declining and decaying imperialism is the really worrying one. And it kind of taps in a bit to what Walter was saying about the attack on democracy, which is clearly going on. I think the Democrats would have colluded in that, to be honest with you, because they're losing their historic voting base, aren't they? And we can see the effects of that, as Soraya was pointing out, in terms of the real worry about the German elections and what the AfD might score in Germany now is, I think, very worrying. But also there's another side to this, which is, does Trump's victory signal in any way the shift in American foreign policy from one that was kind of trying to sanction Russia in terms of the ongoing war, to one that's going back to a strategy which is saying we need to separate Russia from China, and China's the main enemy. And there might be something in that, I think. There might be something that the wing of the American ruling class that was really unhappy with the Ukraine war, and was really unhappy with kind of what they felt was that an unnecessary alliance being built between Russia and China, may try and end the war quite quickly for those reasons. But of course the military industrial complex are probably in there wanting them to spend more money. So we're in a tricky spot. I'm not sure I'm in a position to advise our American comrades about what to do next, but I think it points in the direction of not calling for a vote for the Democrats next time, and focusing efforts on building a socialist party, even if it is, and I understand how difficult it is, but even if it is state by state, and thinking what can be done on a state by state basis I think that's kind of where I would stand there, really, because it's not that dissimilar to the position that we've got here, except we're the 53rd state, aren't we?
Thanks very much, Will. I see any other hands? And if you see anybody sees them and I can't see them, Walter, you want to come back? Let me just see. Okay, Walter, you come back because it's a debate.
Okay, I won't say anything more about voting for Harris tactically or not. I put it all in that. Comrades can check that statement that I put that I linked to in the chat. I do want to comment on the comments that comrades have made about bemoan the lack of an effort to build the Socialist Party or any kind of a left party in the United States. The last time that was actually possible, I think, was the 1930s, when there was a burgeoning labor movement that ended up representing almost half of the American industrial working class. And there were calls for a labor party at that time, which Trotsky eventually supported, but the Trotskyists, as it happened, got into it late. I'm not sure that would have made a qualitative difference in the efforts, but it was shut down essentially by World War II. And since then, in the 40s, the Communist Party was very influential. But by that time, they were totally tied to the Democratic Party. And the description that comrades have given about the left being tied to the Democratic Party has essentially held since then, and especially because of the labor bureaucracy, which since World War II has been totally tied to the Democratic Party. And there have been various left efforts to try to get around that, but they didn't have much chance of succeeding, and of course, they didn't succeed. Trying to look ahead, it's very difficult, as an American figure once said, it's very difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. But one possibility that I can see is a split in the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party really suffered a tremendous disaster even for its own sake, never mind for the masses of people. And there's a lot of rethinking that has to be going on. And I think that there could be cataclysmic events that could force the Democratic, or at least parts of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, the Sanders, and especially the Sanders far left of the Democratic Party, that's left within the Democratic Party. It isn't far left in any overall sense, to form a new party. That's, as far as I can see, that's the most likely way a new socialist type party could happen. And again, it's very difficult to predict the future. But one possibility is that the Trumpists will overreach. That is to say, they will try some outrage which even angers their own base, their own supporters. And that might well be the attempt to deport millions of people, when it turns out that the Latino communities are devastated, when the economy is devastated. It was already pointed out here, because immigrant workers do so much in terms of construction, agriculture, restaurants. Everywhere you go in those fields, you see immigrant workers. So they might overreach and make some kind of a move that turns off their own supporters and enables the creation of a mass protest movement. And some of the Democratic Party leaders may go along, and it may mean a split in the Democratic Party. I don't see the left itself without that happening. I'm not in favor of the DSA strategy of trying to win over the Democratic Party from within. I don't think that's going to happen, but it could happen from without if there is a mass protest movement that triggers a lot of rethinking. Okay. A lot of the Democratic base could join it, and even some of the Democratic leadership. Again, the Sanders types.
Thanks. All right, Walter, thank you very much for that. Ed, I'm going to call you back in to respond to what's been quite a wide-ranging debate and discussion. So you've got just under 10 minutes. I don't know if you'll need all of that, but you've got it anyway.
Thanks, Nick. So yeah, I think there's, as you say, it's a wide topic, and of course the discussion has been a good one and a wide-ranging one. I can't possibly respond to all of the points made. I think we need to think very carefully about how we assess the prospects of what things are going to be like under the Trump presidency, in much the same way as we would need to think very carefully about how we assess any similar political development in the European countries that have been mentioned, because clearly seismic changes are on the way in those countries as well. And we need to think about how we communicate with our class and how we analyze, and the language that we use, and how we describe things that are going on. We have to remember that the notion of Trump being a fascist, while undoubtedly rooted in many of the horrendous policies that he advocates, has advocated in the past and advocates for the future, is also inescapably part of an effort by the Democratic Party establishment to try and launder their own reputation, but also to rehabilitate the two-party system by laundering the reputation of the Reagan and Bush presidencies, trying to set Trump and his presidency as something distinct and apart from those, and in doing so, effectively cozying up to everyone from Dick Cheney to George W. Bush. Trump is, in my view, not a fascist in the sense of bringing about someone who will bring about a fascist takeover in the United States during his time in office. I don't think he will play that role. I think this depiction of what took place on the 6th of January 2020 or 2021 rather, as something comparable to Mussolini's March on Rome is ultimately, I think, mistaken. I don't think it had that significance. And clearly the plans were not sufficiently in place for Trump to make any kind of serious effort at seizing power or stealing the election this time around, had the votes gone against him. And so we need to think carefully about what we say, and that we don't exaggerate, and we spell out clearly why Trump is an enemy of the working class, and why both parties, in fact, are enemies of the working class, but particularly what's wrong with Trump and his policies, because only by doing that in a careful and measured way will we actually win the ear of working class people, who will recognize that we are telling the truth, and that we are not exaggerating, and we're not certainly not running point for the Democrats or their equivalents on this side of the Atlantic. So I think that's one thing that I'd seek to emphasize. Will mentioned the internment of Japanese Americans, and I think it's entirely appropriate to do so, because of course we need to remind ourselves that the capitalist system and the capitalist state are capable of tremendous acts of barbarity against its citizens and against the people who live within its jurisdiction. And we should never forget that. It can always turn out worse than we expect. And of course it did in that circumstance, with about 120,000 people being interned during World War II. But at the same time, undocumented migrants are generally thought to number between 10 and 20 million people in the United States, so about 100 times more in terms of the numbers that we're dealing with compared to Japanese Americans who are interned. So the mass deportations, if Trump and the Republican Party were to follow through on that threat, would be a hugely different kind of project. It would meet, I think, with resistance on a massive scale. And we shouldn't, for a moment, underestimate the danger, but we should also not underestimate the strength and the potential strength of our class, and the kind of resistance that ordinary working class people are capable of and willing to mount if they are given the resources to do so. And so seeking to build the strength of our class and mobilize it to meet the coming struggles is, of course, going to be a key task for us, not just in the American context, but of course in all of the countries with which we're concerned. We shouldn't exaggerate dangers. We shouldn't play on people's fears unless it's justified to do so, because of course that is a key way in which establishment Democrats have always sought to lock in migrant and black votes by effectively saying to them, we are the only people who will protect you. You have to vote for us because look what you get if the Republicans win. In terms of looking ahead, we're really going to have to see, I think, how the emerging civil war inside the Democratic Party pans out, because there is an awful lot of blame to go around, and there is a significant fallout emerging between figures on the left of the party and the establishment, but also between establishment figures as well, because there is significant ill feeling over the way that Biden was encouraged to cancel his bid for re-election. So I think really we're going to have to see how that pans out and see what gains can be made. It may be that there are still significant gains to be made by appealing to the base of the Democratic Party. And it may be that there is still some mileage in that strategy, at least in a measured sense, but only to the extent that it doesn't detract in the long run from the task of building what's really needed, which is a mass party of socialism. I'll finish on this because Will raised it. It may well be that the Ukraine war it is drawing towards its conclusion as support and enthusiasm for it runs out. This might be accelerated by the re-election of Trump. Of course, it's not at all the way in which we would seek to have that come to an end, but we need to be alive to the possibilities, and we need to think about how we can continue to raise the very important arguments that we have been raising, and socialists in America have been raising against the war, against the military-industrial complex, and not allow those arguments to fall into abeyance simply because this or that war reaches a temporary or a permanent conclusion. So I'll leave it there. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you very much, Ed. Now, Virginia, I've seen very late you've put your hand up. Did you have a point to make or a question? You need to unmute.
Yeah, sorry. Something. Yeah, a point. Yes, just in relation to
just very quick. Sorry, Virginia, just very quickly, if you would.
Yeah, it was just said. I missed the first when you said something about the Democrats saying that they would protect people. I mean, I don't know what you would say about the civil rights movement and the Lyndon Johnson, that is, losing his Southern base to the Republican Party by supporting the civil rights movement. And now I'm not going to go on and about what's happened afterwards and all those things, but it does seem to me that you've missed, you really do have to address that if you're going to make that point that you just made about, the Democrats not protecting is a very different, where you had a huge movement, and so protecting would be a little bit too patronizing.
Right. Well, Virginia, that's a good point, Virginia, that needs to be put into the mix in terms of how people proceed. So thanks for raising that. I'm going to just draw the meeting to an end. I'm just going to remind everybody that we've got another meeting in 2 weeks' time. We've got Moshe Machover going to be returning to the issue of Israel, Palestine, Gaza, Lebanon, Middle East war. That should be an excellent meeting, so I encourage everybody to come to that. And then 2 weeks after that, we've got the final meeting of the year before we break for Christmas, and that's going to be what type of party should we be trying to build, which is, in a sense, looking at what we've just been talking about America, but in the domestic situation. And then I just like to remind people who may be able to come this Saturday in Manchester. We have a face-to-face, in-person meeting where we're discussing the question of what sort of party should we be building, how do we build it, and particularly how do we find other people to work with to bring together so that collectively we and others can take the necessary, if you like, baby steps or initial steps towards getting a nucleus or an embryo of a new party. We can't do it on our own, but I'm sure, and we're sure, that there are other people out there who have similar ideas, aims, and objectives to ours. So if you can come on Saturday, it's in central Manchester. It's from 11 till 5. It would be great to see you. You'll have had the bulletin. On my Facebook page, there's my phone number, and you've got an email on the TAS website. So please get in touch and we can let you know further details. With that, I'll thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. The video will be going up on YouTube in a few days' time when I've had an opportunity to edit it. Look forward to seeing you again in a fortnight's time. Thank you very much. Good night.